Hi, this is Dr. Tochi with a response to a really interesting comment that someone posted on one of my recent video clips. Now, in that video clip, I talked about how patriarchal the Igbo culture is and was, and how this disadvantaged women, okay, and how women were being excluded from indigenous religious and indigenous spiritual spaces because of their gender and unfair, malicious stereotypes that are held against the women. And we need to be clear about these stereotypes. Even though I mentioned that the men in the Igbo traditional path, which is called ordinala or ordinani, okay, even though that majority of them tend to exclude women, the insidiousness of the chauvinism is such that it has cascaded down and even permeated the ranks of the women. So a good job has been done to the extent that even the women self-police themselves within that system. So you will have women within that patriarchal system say that they themselves as women and their sisters and their mothers and their daughters and their nieces and their female cousins are also unclean, also unworthy. And you will even hear women say things like, oh, you know, women don't get along and women are not to be trusted and women are wicked. Now, the perpetuation of these kind of stereotypes amongst women is not new, it's not unique. Because when we talk about female genital mutilation, which is circumcision of women, you will find out that the main proponents of that horrific tradition, cultural tradition, are the women themselves, and the women who actually perform the circumcisions are women themselves. And then the women say, yes, if you want to get a good husband, you have to be circumcised. If you want to remain a virgin until you get married, you're circumcised. If you want to appease the gods, and so on and so on and so forth. So you find that the women themselves have been programmed with the indoctrination that they themselves buttress the patriarchal viewpoint and structure. And they say, yes, the men are right to say what they say. But when you call out these women and ask them to defend what they're saying with hard facts, all they can do is just tell stories and repeat stories that they heard from other women or stories that they heard from the males. Okay. So going back to this issue of ordinani amongst the Igbos, someone wrote a comment in YouTube saying that you have the Umuada system. And the Umuada system, for those of you who don't know, is a group of or society of firstborn daughters. And within the Igbo culture, they're generally honored. If you're first daughter, you automatically become a member of this group. They go to events, they're honored at events, they have a say in enforcing the culture. So their main function is to enforce the culture. But this is the question: do they have a say in governance? Do they have a say in creating the rules that govern the Igbo people? Are they part of the Igbo government? And the answer is no. So when you look at the Igbo culture, there are no women, okay? And I know there are exceptions to the rule, but there are no women who are members of the King's Council. Women are not allowed. Women may have chieftaincy titles, but they're not allowed to be members of the King's Council. They're not part of the authority and decision-making apparatus of Igbo governance. So yes, you have the Umuada, they give them food, they give them money, they give them a place of honor, they sit together in a group, but the function of Umuada is enforcing rules that have already been established by the males. Now, what do I mean by exceptions to the rules? Now, if you go to the Igbo speaking, Igbo culture influenced groups that are on the outskirts of the main Igbo tribes. So when you start looking at the riverine areas, when you start looking at places in Asaba, in Obaru, you start looking at places in Bayelsa, places in River State where you have Igbo descendants, Igbo mixtures, you will find women in those cultures being part of the King's Council. But you will also find different things within their system that support that. So, for instance, you can go to Obara or go to Asaba. They have the Omu. Omu is considered a king in her own right. She's equivalent to the king in these places. Okay? She has her own palace. She marries her own wives. But again, notice the patriarchal structure. She can marry wives. She cannot marry husbands. So again, the idea of polyandry, which is the acquisition of multiple women in a marital structure, that is also a patriarchal thing. So the Omu is equivalent to the king in those outskirt Igbo cultures. This is not mainstream Igbo. She can have wives. She can make decisions. She's part of the King's Council. But she doesn't have her own council where men are now part of her council. She has to be part of the King's Council. Now, can she make some orders? Yes, she can. Is she part of decision making and authority? Yes. But again, it is within the confines and the constructs of patriarchy in the Igbo culture. And her reference points, the things she uses for examples, are also drawn from patriarchy. There is one Omo from, I believe, the current Omo from Asaba. She did a presentation, public presentation recently, and she was advocating for polyandry, the right for men to marry multiple women. And the arguments she was advancing are the same arguments that have been advanced by men. She was not there advancing unique arguments like, well, if men can marry multiple wives, why can't women marry multiple husbands? And so we can start going down that rabbit path. So again, we need to understand that patriarchy has consumed and subsumed the Igbo culture to the extent that a lot of ancient cultures and traditions, especially spiritual traditions that were extant before Christianity, vanished. There is a female deity, Ogugu, in Igbo land, also known as Ani. Nowadays, you have men who are priests of Ogugu, but they don't allow women to be priestesses of Ogugu. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't. So what we need to understand is that in the Igbo culture, there were things that used to represent the rights and freedoms of women that no longer exist. For instance, in the past, women used to be identified with and stick with their father's name even after marriage. But that is not the case now. Because of Christianity, women take on the men's name because that is the Christian standard and has now become a cultural standard. But if you go back and ask questions how people are identified in lineages, you'll find out that women were identified by their first name, their father's name, regardless of who they married and how many children they had. So I hope that this clarifies.